When I first moved into that quiet neighborhood on the edge of town, I wasn't looking for anything except peace. After a messy breakup and too many nights alone in a tiny apartment, I needed a fresh start. The moving boxes were still piled up when I met him, my next-door neighbor, Officer Ryan Hale. He was the kind of man you notice even when you're trying not to. Tall, confident, and always with that calm authority that came from years on the job. The first time we spoke, he smiled politely and offered a hand to help me carry in a heavy box. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, his voice steady and kind. I thanked him, trying not to stare too long. The glint of his wedding ring reminded me where my boundaries needed to stay. Over the next few weeks, I saw him often, mowing his lawn, washing his patrol car, or waving as he left for work in the early mornings. His wife, Mia, was usually rushing off to her nursing shifts at the hospital. They looked like the perfect couple from a distance, but even from across the fence, I could sense something distant in their rhythm. Polite smiles, minimal words like two people who'd grown used to silence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I accidentally locked myself out of my house. My phone and keys were inside, and I stood there feeling helpless. That's when I heard Ryan's voice from his porch. "You need a hand?" He walked over with a small grin and managed to help me open a window from the back. I remember the way he laughed when I nearly tripped climbing inside. It wasn't a big moment, but it felt like something shifted that night, a line quietly drawn between stranger and friend. Afterward, he stayed for coffee. We sat at my small kitchen table, steam curling from our mugs, talking about everything from work to music to how different the neighborhood was before I arrived. He told me about his long shifts, the stress of his job, and how Mia's night rotations meant they barely saw each other. I listened quietly, wondering if he realized how lonely he sounded. Days turned into weeks, and I began to look forward to those casual chats, short talks across the fence, the friendly nods whenever he jogged past my porch. I kept telling myself it was harmless, that I just enjoyed the company. But sometimes when his eyes lingered a moment too long or his smile felt a bit too warm, I wondered if he felt it too. That strange pull between two people who shouldn't be drawn to each other. One Saturday afternoon, I was fixing my mailbox when Ryan stopped by in casual clothes. It was the first time I'd seen him without his uniform. He leaned on the fence, easy and relaxed, asking if I liked the neighborhood so far. We ended up talking for an hour. The conversation flowed effortlessly, like we'd known each other for years. When he laughed, I realized I hadn't heard genuine laughter like that in a long time, from either of us. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he'd looked at me when I told him about my past relationship, the small silence that hung in the air when I said I'd been living alone for almost a year. There was empathy in his eyes, maybe even understanding. Still, I kept reminding myself he was married, and I was just the new neighbor. Then one evening, as rain tapped gently on the window, there was a knock at my door. Ryan stood there holding a flashlight. The power had gone out on our street. He checked to make sure I was okay, saying it was part of his routine patrol. I invited him in while we waited for the lights to return. The house was dim, lit only by candlelight. We talked about childhood memories, small dreams, and the kind of peace we both seemed to be searching for. When the power finally flickered back on, he looked at his watch and smiled. "Guess I should get back," he said softly. But neither of us moved for a moment. There was nothing said, just a quiet understanding that something unspoken had begun to grow between us. After he left, I sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I tried to convince myself it was just friendship, just loneliness, just two neighbors finding comfort in conversation. But deep down, I knew better. There was something in the way he looked back as he walked away, something in the air that night that made my heart ache. Sometimes love doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up, quiet, complicated, and completely out of place. And as much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't help but feel that my new beginning had already turned into something else entirely. The days after that night felt strange, familiar, but somehow heavier. Every morning I'd see Ryan heading to work, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. He always waved, sometimes smiled, but there was something different in the air. Maybe I was imagining it, Maybe I just wanted to believe there was more behind that polite grin. One afternoon, while I was watering the plants, Ryan leaned over the fence with that easy confidence of his. "You free later?" he asked. "Thinking of grilling. Mia's working another double." His voice was casual, but his eyes held something else, a quiet invitation I couldn't turn down. That evening, I joined him in his backyard. The smell of charcoal and grilled corn mixed with the warm scent of summer. We talked about everything: movies, work stress, life in small towns. When I mentioned my old art job in the city, he looked genuinely interested. "You ever think of doing that again?" he asked. I shrugged. "Sometimes." "I guess I lost my inspiration," he smiled faintly. "Maybe you'll find it here." As the sun dipped below the fence line, the conversation shifted. Ryan spoke about his marriage for the first time, and his voice changed, softer, more vulnerable. "Mia and we were different people when we got married," he said quietly. "Now it feels like we're just holding on to a memory." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. When the night grew cooler, we sat on the porch, sharing a quiet moment that felt like both comfort and danger. There was a pull between us, invisible but undeniable. I could feel it in the pauses between words, in the way his gaze lingered too long. My mind told me to leave, but my heart stayed exactly where it was. In the following weeks, our friendship deepened. Ryan started dropping by after his evening patrol, saying he needed to unwind. We'd sit in the living room, talking about the kind of things you only share when you trust someone: fears, regrets, small hopes. He told me about the pressure of being a cop, how it made him build walls even with people he loved. "It's like I'm always on duty," he said once. Even at home. I wanted to be a safe space for him, but I could feel the lines blurring. Every moment we spent together made it harder to remember where those lines were supposed to be. Sometimes Mia would wave at me from her car as she left for work, kind, unsuspecting, and the guilt would hit me like a wave. I wasn't doing anything wrong, not yet, but the thought of what could happen lingered like a secret neither of us dared to name. One stormy night, there was a knock on my door again. When I opened it, Ryan stood there, rain dripping from his jacket. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was low, tired. I could tell he'd had another argument. We sat on the couch, thunder echoing outside, and he told me everything, how distant things had become, how he didn't even recognize himself anymore. I listened, wishing I could fix something that wasn't mine to fix. There was a silence that felt too long. His hand brushed against mine as he reached for his coffee. We both froze. I could hear my own heartbeat. But instead of pulling away, he whispered, "I don't know why it's so easy to talk to you." I smiled faintly, pretending I didn't understand the weight of what he meant. But I did. Every word, every glance carried meaning, the kind that could change everything. The next day, Ryan avoided me. No wave, no message. It hurt more than I expected. I tried to distract myself with work, walks, anything to forget. But when you grow used to someone's presence, their absence becomes loud. Days passed, and I wondered if I had imagined it all, if those late-night talks, those lingering looks, were just wishful thinking. Then one evening, as I was closing the blinds, I saw him standing by the fence. He looked unsure, almost guilty. "Can we talk?" he asked. We stood outside in the quiet dusk. He apologized for disappearing, saying he needed space to think. I told him I understood. But as I turned to go, he said something that made me stop. "You moving away won't make this go away, Ethan." His words hung in the air, heavy and trembling. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. We were two people caught between right and wrong, between loyalty and truth, and neither of us knew how to let go. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, wondering if love was ever supposed to feel this complicated. Maybe the real test wasn't about what we wanted, but about what we were willing to walk away from. After that night, everything changed, not in a dramatic way, but in quiet, unspoken shifts. Ryan and I started keeping our distance. No more late talks, no more backyard dinners. We still exchanged polite waves, but even those felt heavy with things unsaid. I told myself it was for the best. that we both needed space to remember who we were before all of this began. But even distance couldn't silence the thoughts that followed me everywhere. I'd see his patrol car driving by, and my heart would twist with something I didn't want to name. I kept busy with work, painting again, trying to rebuild a life that didn't revolve around someone who wasn't mine to love. But the truth was, he'd already left a mark I couldn't erase. Weeks passed before I saw him again up close. It was late afternoon, and I was returning from the grocery store when I found Ryan sitting on his porch steps, still in uniform, staring at nothing. He looked exhausted, not just physically but emotionally drained. I hesitated, then walked over. "Rough day?" I asked. He gave a small laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "Rough month." We talked for a while, keeping it simple, work, the weather, the usual safe topics. But then he said quietly, "Mia and I decided to separate." My heart skipped a beat, but not from excitement. I saw the pain in his face, and for a moment, I understood how much this decision cost him. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He nodded. "It's for the best. She deserves someone who's really there, and I need to figure out who I actually am." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how much courage it took for him to say that out loud. To finally stop pretending. And somewhere in that reflection I realized I needed the same courage. To stop waiting for something uncertain. To start living for myself again. Over the next few months, things changed for both of us. Ryan moved into a smaller apartment across town, taking some time off work to clear his head. I started picking up freelance art projects again, slowly finding my rhythm. We didn't talk often, just an occasional message or passing hello, but there was no bitterness, no blame. Just two people learning how to breathe again. One day, out of nowhere, he texted, "You were right. Some things you can't fix, but you can learn from them." I smiled at my phone longer than I probably should have. It wasn't a romantic message, but it carried peace, a kind I hadn't felt in a long time. Months later, I was invited to a community art fair to showcase my paintings. It was a small event, filled with local families and music. I was helping set up when I heard someone call my name. I turned around, and there he was, Ryan. Casual clothes, no uniform, no guarded expression. He looked lighter, like someone who had finally started forgiving himself. He smiled, and for a second, it felt like time folded in on itself. "You did it," he said, pointing to the paintings. "You found your inspiration again," I laughed. "Guess you were right about that." We talked for a while, about his new place, his therapy sessions, how he'd reconnected with Mia as friends. He told me he was focusing on honesty now, even when it was uncomfortable. "It's not easy," he said, "but it's real. There was no grand confession, no dramatic reunion. Just mutual respect and quiet understanding. We'd both come too far to go backward." Yet in that moment I felt something even deeper than love. Acceptance. The kind that doesn't demand possession or promises, only peace. As the sun began to set, he looked around the park, then back at me. "Funny how life works," he said. "You move into a house looking for a fresh start, and somehow you help someone else find theirs." I smiled, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Maybe that's what we were supposed to be all along," I said. "Not a mistake, just a turning point." He nodded, his eyes warm but calm. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." "You too, Ryan," I replied. When he walked away, I didn't feel the ache I once did. There was a quiet fullness in my chest, not sadness, but gratitude. Because sometimes, the people who enter our lives for a moment end up changing everything, even if they don't stay. That night, back at home, I sat by the window, the same spot where it all began. The neighborhood was calm, the world felt steady again. I thought about the past year, the lessons, the heartbreak, the growth. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't wish for anything different. Maybe love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means letting go with grace, knowing that what you shared was real, even if it wasn't forever. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.